I counted 12 people who congratulated my wife before her father's coffin even touched the earth. That's not exaggeration. I counted silently. From the back row, one step behind the fake ferns, they rolled in to soften the optics of burying a corporate patriarch. Her pearl earrings shimmered under the funeral tent like stage lights. She smiled the same corporate smile she wore on investor calls, shaking hands with the same board members who used to toast her father, now bowing their heads slightly as if grief were a formality. "Madam CEO," one whispered, patting her elbow gently like she'd just aced a quarterly earnings call. I didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't approach the casket. My name wasn't in the program. My chair wasn't in the front row. My wife had made sure of that. She gave the eulogy, of course. Nothing personal, nothing messy, just facts. His accolades, market achievements, charity foundations. She mentioned the legacy he'd left behind, the vision that now, in her words, lives through the boardroom we shared. That boardroom where I once spent 14 hours straight during the 2007 acquisition, drafting the merger blueprint while she was still planning her art gallery launch. Legacy, what a word. I stood behind the hedge of platitudes next to a waiter who didn't recognize me and whispered something about the new regime starting fast. I didn't correct him. I just watched my wife press her fingers to the closed casket one last time. Staged pause, like a curtain call. They assumed I was just the quiet husband, the technical mind in the background, the one who married up. No one asked who funded the first round of expansion. No one questioned why her father had never sold off his voting shares. No one knew they were already signed over to someone else. Here's a wild stat. Over 90% of people skim stories like this without subscribing or following the page. And honestly, that's the one metric that actually motivates the team to keep building this kind of story. So if you're here reading, tap follow. It's free, and yeah, it helps us a ton. Anyway, after the casket was lowered, I left without shaking hands. No limo, no condolences, no whispers of "we're here for you." They weren't, and I didn't need them to be. At home, the house was too quiet. My wife had arranged a separate reception for core stakeholders, code for people who mattered now that her father didn't. I wasn't invited, not even a courtesy nod. I made a pot of black coffee, sat in the den, turned off my phone. Then I opened the mahogany lockbox her father gave me 12 years ago. No key, just a biometric latch coded to my thumbprint. Inside, a single manila folder with a worn corner and a faint scrawl on the tab, Contingency 1A. She never knew about it. Her father never told her. He'd seen something in me once, back before she twisted herself into someone new, someone synthetic. He trusted me with pieces of the empire she thought she inherited. I had the signatures, I had the numbers, and I had patience. Grief makes people careless. They assume death means the chessboard clears, but real power moves quietly. That night, while she toasted her new era at the shareholder reception, I ran my fingers along the inked margins of a decades-old clause she'd never read. I didn't need to raise my voice or flip a table. That wasn't my style. I just needed time. Time. And Monday. She thought the funeral ended the chapter. She didn't realize I was already writing the next one. They changed my email password before the body was cold. Not officially, of course. That would have required paperwork. They just updated infrastructure. And suddenly my calendar stopped syncing. My access badge needed revalidation. And the weekly finance briefs, ones I helped draft for the past 15 years, never landed in my inbox again. My wife smiled when I asked, "Oh, it's just while the board restructures things. Nothing personal, babe. Nothing personal." That phrase is always a lie. By Tuesday, meetings I'd scheduled were mysteriously postponed or relocated, but no one told me where. Wednesday, I found out secondhand, through an intern no less, that the new software deployment I designed had gone live without me. Thursday, they moved my parking spot 3 levels down. Friday, the security team couldn't find my credentials and asked me to sign in as a guest. I didn't protest, just signed the clipboard like a stranger visiting his own legacy. The final blow came the following Monday morning. They waited until 9:03 a.m. to call me in, like they wanted it to feel like another regular meeting. Same sterile conference room we used to host investor pitches in. Same bland wallpaper that made every victory feel like a PowerPoint slide. The board chair was there, flanked by 2 newer members I hadn't seen since the funeral. My wife sat at the far end, legs crossed, fingers steepled like she was deciding whether to fire the caterer or me. "We appreciate your contributions over the years," the chair began, voice as warm as an automated voicemail. but given the restructuring and strategic pivots, the board has decided to terminate your position effective immediately. No vote, no discussion, just a sentence. I smiled, not big, not dramatic, just enough to make one of them flinch. Of course, I said, you'll have my keys by noon. No anger, no argument, just calm. That silence rattled them more than any outburst would have. I watched my wife blink once, that twitch she gets when something doesn't go to script. She expected rage, pleading, an ego bruise big enough to bleed pride. What she got instead was a man who had already packed his emotional bags and was now just folding the corners. One board member, the youngest, kept shifting in his seat. I think he'd read the old financials. Maybe he knew my name was on more documents than they'd realized. Maybe he remembered the discretionary account I'd opened with the late CEO's blessing, the one no one ever audited because it wasn't material. But he said nothing, just stared at his tablet like it could save him. Back at my office, I didn't slam a single drawer. I didn't sweep a hand across the desk or yank my nameplate from the door. I packed, methodically, the way I used to when her father and I would fly out for acquisitions. Shirts rolled, files sorted, time zones memorized. People walked by, avoided eye contact. The new HR liaison, a girl who still called me sir, offered me a branded cardboard box. Thank you, I said. It'll go nicely with the shares I'm keeping. She didn't get the joke. That was fine. By 11:47 a.m., I was gone. Left the badge on the desk, locked the door behind me, took nothing I hadn't brought in myself. I wasn't angry. I was curious, because the whole thing was too coordinated, too clean. 6 days from funeral to firing? That wasn't a pivot. That was a plan. She didn't just want me out of the company. She wanted me out of the story. And that's when I knew she never read the whole book. The thing no one tells you about being erased is how quiet it is. No final applause, no grand send-off, just the soft collapse of years being folded into a box, like laundry from a drawer no one opens anymore. I packed everything myself, didn't want the intern to fumble through the paperweights I bought in Prague, or the cufflinks her father gave me the day the first IPO cleared. Each item had a story. None of them would be told again, at least not in that building. The desk was spotless when I finished, not out of spite, just precision. The same way I used to scrub numbers before a quarterly review, I left the place better than I found it. Because I could. Because they wouldn't. The receptionist, Janelle, 26, polite, always remembered my coffee order, blinked when she saw the box. You're leaving? She asked, clearly briefed not to ask. Just cleaning house, I said. Fresh air's good for strategy. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes lingered too long. She knew what I meant. She'd seen too many people walk out that door looking gutted. I didn't look gutted. I looked like I was heading somewhere she couldn't see. Outside, the sun hit me like a slap. Not poetic, just hot, sharp, uncomfortable in a way I hadn't been in years. It was fitting. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. Shoes in the hallway. Jacket hung, not mine. Hers, a bottle of Yamazaki on the bar, half drunk, no cap in sight. The kind her father used to pour when he wanted to remind someone they were just a guest. She was in my chair. Not the reading chair, not the dining chair, my chair. The leather one in the den where I'd sketched out 10-year projections, scribbled flowcharts at 2 a.m., ran numbers that saved the company in 2018. She'd never sat in it before. Not once. She used to say it smelled like old ambition. Now she looked right at home in it, legs crossed, glass in hand. The last of my father-in-law's private reserves swirling casually like this was just another Tuesday. This is better for both of us, she said without looking up. You'll be more comfortable outside. I said nothing, just walked toward the stairs. Behind me, her voice had that tone, sweet, acidic, performative, the kind she used with waiters and journalists. Still pretending you matter? I stopped halfway up, turned slightly, not all the way. Monday will be interesting, I said. And then I left her there, in my chair, in his whiskey, drunk on power she thought was hers. I didn't slam the door. I didn't sigh. I just walked upstairs. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defeat. It was subtraction. Let her bask in her little throne. She thought the lights were all on her now, that the room had cleared for her coronation. She didn't know that behind the curtains, wires had been quietly moved, pulleys reset, the whole play rewritten. She thought I'd finally left the stage. She didn't realize I still owned the theater. Sunday night felt like the eye of the storm. Still, Too still. I met Arthur at a private office downtown, one of those heritage brownstones hidden between glossy glass towers, no signage, just a brass buzzer and a hallway that smelled like old books and expensive ink. Arthur's firm specialized in things that needed to stay quiet: intergenerational wealth, succession law, bulletproof trusts, the kind of law that never showed up on billboards. He was already there when I arrived. Same charcoal suit, same tired eyes, steel briefcase by his feet like a coiled dog. We didn't waste time. He unlocked the case and pulled out a leather binder, thick, heavy, cornered with reinforced brass. Then came the envelope, sealed, wax stamped, my initials carved in red. He slid it across the table. Everything's still intact. I reviewed it again this morning. They didn't touch a thing. Of course they didn't, I said. They don't know it exists. He opened the binder. Dozens of pages, contracts, voting agreements, transfer documents, some signed back in 2007, others more recent, all meticulous, all legal, all active. He tapped the clause labeled Foundational Equity Transfer, then the one tagged Voting Consolidation Trust, then finally a short page, just 4 lines, marked Clause 12C, Extraordinary Authority in Absence of Founding Member. That one always made me smile. They really didn't read the inheritance clause? Arthur asked, barely suppressing a laugh. I shook my head. They thought I married in. He raised an eyebrow. They never checked who funded the buyout in 2007, I added. Back then, her father needed capital. Quiet capital. The kind that didn't trigger alarm bells or hand over leverage to rival firms. I was already married to her by then. A safe source. But not passive. What none of them realized was that I didn't just bring in the funds. I bought the leverage. I had negotiated that 29% equity stake, not as a gesture, but as collateral. Over the next decade, I acquired more, little by little, through shell trusts, custodial accounts, and silent partner arrangements her father personally endorsed. I never boasted, never even hinted. They thought I stayed in the background out of humility. I stayed in the background to build the walls no one saw going up. And now, between the legacy trust, the marital equity, and the consolidated silent shares, I controlled over 70% of the voting rights. Legally, quietly, fully enforceable. By morning, the paper trail would be active. We reviewed each document, signing where necessary. Arthur notarized them, his stamp echoing across the desk like a gavel. The board won't take this lightly, he warned. I'm not suing them, I said. I'm correcting an error. He nodded, a glint of admiration flickering behind his usual deadpan. You're not a shareholder anymore, he said. You're the board. I looked out the window. The city blinked below like a motherboard. Lights in some windows, dark in others. Systems powering up and shutting down. They buried a king, I said, then handed the keys to the court jester. Arthur laughed at that. Not loud, just a low, satisfied chuckle. Tomorrow, he said, they learn the jester owns the castle. At exactly 9:01 a.m., the company's executive floor buzzed, almost audibly, like a machine switching modes. No alarms, no shouting, no scandalized whispers, just a string of simultaneous pings hitting every board member's inbox, one after another. Subject: Notice of Extraordinary Shareholder Meeting, per Clause 12C. No emojis, no exclamation points, just clinical precision. The attachments were worse. First, a formal motion to dissolve the current executive structure. Second, revocation of all temporary appointments pending review. Third, a voting schedule, same day noon. And the seal at the top of the PDF, not the corporate logo. The family trust's insignia, old school, embossed, the kind her father used on documents that never made it into board packets, the kind with actual weight. The CFO saw it and froze. She'd tried for years to get access to that trust. Her late boss never even let her request a summary of it, called it legacy architecture. Now it was signing her career's eviction notice. Downstairs, physical copies were being hand-delivered by bonded couriers in dark suits with clipboards. Real paper, real ink. Not the kind of memo you could mark unread and pretend away. Each envelope came in a slim black folder with the shareholder meeting agenda tucked into a side pocket. Simple, sharp, irrefutable. The board chair's assistant looked pale as she opened the envelope. Is this legal? The reply came not from a lawyer, but from the corporate secretary, an old fox who knew where all the bones were buried. She adjusted her glasses, skimmed the signature block, and nodded once. Clause 12C. It's airtight. Upstairs, my wife was mid-coffee when her assistant slid the envelope onto her desk. She took one glance, then two. Her lips parted slightly. Not fear yet, just confusion. She scanned the dates, the signatory line, the motion language, then the seal, then the clause number, then her hand stopped moving. I hadn't sued them. I hadn't accused them of wrongdoing. That would have given them something to defend. This wasn't a fight. It was a reset. And resets are harder to argue with. At 10:03 a.m., the CFO called a hasty meeting in the glass war room. No agenda, no minutes. It's a bluff, she said. There's no way he has that kind of stake. But one of the younger board members, Evan, fresh MBA, still green behind the ears, raised his hand like he was back in class. Didn't he fund the 2007 expansion? The CFO waved it off. He married in. He was gifted that stake, but her voice cracked halfway through the sentence because she remembered too late the old audit file her predecessor flagged once, a file she'd buried because it was incomplete, unsigned, except it had been signed, just not by her, signed, sealed, witnessed, by the founder himself, in legal ink, not digital, the one thing none of them thought to look for because it wasn't on a damn spreadsheet. At 10:31 a.m., I arrived in the building. No fanfare, no entourage. I didn't even wear a tie, just a dark blazer and the quiet confidence of someone who never left, no matter how much they pretended he had. The receptionist, new girl, hadn't been briefed on my termination, stood when she saw me. Mr. Loring. Good morning, I said. Could you let the board know I'm here? She looked confused, then nodded. Of course. Do you have an appointment? Yes, I said, smiling. They just don't know it yet. At precisely noon, the doors to the executive boardroom closed with a soft click, the kind of quiet that carries finality. Every seat was filled, except one, 12 chairs, one empty, the leather still cold. I stood at the head of the table, not seated, just present. I didn't need to posture. My name wasn't on a nameplate. It was in the operating agreement. That was louder than any title. The room smelled of tension, coffee gone cold, nervous sweat masked by cologne, printer ink that had been working overtime all morning. No one spoke. They were reading, rereading, flipping through the black folders in front of them, each one containing the same motion: dissolution of current executive structure, revocation of all interim titles, call for vote on permanent leadership under extraordinary authority as outlined in Clause 12C. The chair, temporarily held by a man who had once toasted my supportive silence, cleared his throat but didn't say a word. His eyes were on the Trust's counsel, Margaret Vickers, late 60s, war-hardened, and silent as a guillotine. She had reviewed every single clause in that trust when her boss was still alive. She'd been handpicked to enforce its terms when he wasn't. At 12:07 p.m., the door burst open. My wife entered, eyes flashing, heels sharp against the marble, phone in one hand, half-buttoned jacket in the other. She scanned the room, already mid-sentence. This meeting violates corporate procedure. I am still the acting CEO. No vote can be held without prior notice and board approval. This is corporate sabotage. Margaret didn't flinch, didn't even look up. She just said, he holds controlling interest. Per Clause 12C, this vote is valid. A full sentence. Nothing more. My wife froze. Her phone slipped slightly in her hand. She looked around for backup. The CFO wouldn't meet her eyes. The chair adjusted his tie. Evan, Green Evan, kept looking at the agenda like maybe it had changed while he blinked. She turned to me, lip curling. You don't even work here. I met her gaze. Calm. Cold. I don't need to. That silence afterward, it didn't roar, it sank. Like a building losing power. No one yelled, no one stormed out. That would have been easier for her. Someone, anyone, validating the chaos she'd been bracing for. Instead, the chair spoke softly. All those in favor of the motion to restructure per the Trust's authority, hands went up, one by one, no hesitation, even the ones who'd smiled at her toast last week, unanimous. She didn't even sit down, she just stood there, mouth parting like she wanted to laugh or scream or negotiate. But the vote was over. Margaret slid a slim folder across the table toward me. Sign here. I did. The pen made the only sound in the room. When I looked up again, she hadn't moved. She blinked twice as if trying to recalibrate. Then her eyes darted to the chair she once called hers. Evan was already pulling it back in. She whispered something I couldn't hear, something probably meant to sting, but I'd stopped listening a long time ago. Control doesn't come with applause, it comes with silence. And in that silence, I watched the room turn, not into chaos, into order. By 4 p.m., the headlines had made it from the inboxes of financial reporters to the wrists of Wall Street analysts. Executive ousted amid founding family restructure. Control reasserted by longtime shareholder after internal shift. Legacy trust realigns corporate leadership following clause invocation. Sterile phrases. Clean cut. But beneath the surface, everyone in the industry knew what it meant. Someone had just pulled off a surgical decapitation of a corporate regime without firing a shot. And then came the line no PR firm could dilute. Former executive terminated following internal restructuring. Ownership remains with founding family. The wording was deliberate. Crafted days ago in a closed-door session with Arthur, Margaret, and a very expensive communications strategist flown in under the radar. Terminated, not resigned, not stepped down, and certainly not amicable. Just terminated. The release was emailed to press outlets, posted to the company's investor relations site, and shared internally by 4:01 p.m. By 4:06, someone at a tech finance blog, bored, sharp, and petty, dug up an internal memo from 6 months ago. It was a scan, her handwriting unmistakable, scribbled in red ink on a printed org chart. He's irrelevant. We need people who actually matter. The site ran it with the headline, irrelevant. Viral in under 20 minutes. And that's when she started calling people. First, the head of comms, then the CFO, then Margaret 3 times in a row. Margaret didn't answer. She sent a group email at 4:23 p.m. titled, Clarification Needed, Today's Statement. It had 5 recipients. 3 of them had already archived it before they even opened it. By 4:30, social media had caught wind. An old wedding photo surfaced on an investor subreddit. Her in that designer dress, me in a suit 2 sizes too big. Captioned, guess who really said I do to the company? Financial influencers spun wild theories. Was she ever really in control? Was she a plant, a pawn? Was the marriage always part of the deal? She wasn't ready for the speculation. She was used to controlling the narrative, walking into interviews with tailored talking points, dropping her last name like a calling card, daughter of the founder, next generation visionary, steward of the family legacy. Now the legacy had voted her out, publicly, legally, irreversibly. Her personal assistant forwarded her a compiled thread of trending posts by 5:00 p.m. Her name was the number 3 trending tag in the financial space, not for accolades, for failure. Somewhere around 5:11, her mother texted just 2 words. What happened? She didn't reply because what could she say? That her husband, the one she dismissed, minimized, and tried to amputate from the company, was the one holding the pen the entire time? That the empire she thought she inherited had already been deeded elsewhere, in writing, long before she ever poured herself into that CEO title? That while she was chasing headlines, I was building shadows? The world wasn't mocking her yet, but it was watching, and that was worse. She tore through the filing cabinet like it owed her an apology. The crisp, curated elegance she wore in boardrooms had cracked. No more perfectly coiled hair, no more expensive restraint, just sweat on her temples and legal folders scattered across the office like crime scene debris. She was barefoot. Her heels lay abandoned near the door, kicked off in the heat of a revelation she hadn't wanted, hadn't expected. Somewhere in the chaos, her voice shrieked, "Where is it?" Her assistant, still relatively new, poor girl, hovered in the doorway holding a glass of water no one asked for. "Ma'am, should I?" "Leave," she snapped. The door closed softly behind her. She rifled past tax files, prenup drafts, trust outlines, half of which she never bothered to read. Because why would she? She was the heir, the daughter, the natural successor. I was just the husband. The satellite. She didn't realize the satellite had his own gravitational pull. Then she found it. A slim black binder with my initials in the corner, one she thought was for tax purposes. Inside, between standard marital disclosures and a notarized summary of shared holdings, was a clause, a small one, barely 8 lines, titled, Addendum to beneficiary distribution terms, conditional exclusions. And in the middle of that text, in bold, in the event of demonstrable spousal hostility tied to corporate sabotage, the signatory hereby forfeits all beneficiary privileges, immediate and future, attached to holdings tied to the founding trust. She blinked at it once, twice, then flipped the page, expecting an escape hatch, a counter clause, a loophole. There wasn't one. But because I drafted it with Margaret years ago, after the first board dinner where she publicly joked that I was the only husband in the room who needed a name tag. That was the first sign. There were others. I filed each one away, not in rage, but in preparation. She was furious back then that I even suggested a prenup, said it was insulting, said her father would be mortified, said I didn't trust her. So I offered a compromise, a trust clause, hidden in plain sight, framed as a business safeguard in case of third-party interference, with a rider about spousal exemptions only applying in cases devoid of malicious corporate influence. She signed it during the same week she flew to Italy with her friends, skimmed it at the airport lounge between spa bookings. Now she held it in her shaking hands. Legal, enforceable, watertight. Her lawyer arrived 15 minutes later. One of those fast-talking, high-retainer types who like to say things like, "We'll handle this quietly." She shoved the binder into his chest like it had burned her. "Tell me that's invalid." He flipped through it, his brow creased. "Please tell me this doesn't mean what I think it means." He looked up. "It's enforceable," he said flatly. She opened her mouth, closed it, then screamed, a short, guttural sound before slamming the binder shut so hard it knocked over a glass paperweight. "He doesn't get to win," she hissed. The lawyer said nothing, because even he could see the truth. She hadn't just lost the company, she'd signed away her stake in it with her own manicured hand, and the knife she tried to twist in my back, it had been dulled years ago by me. Silently, strategically, she'd brought a prop to a war, and never read the script. She pulled into the garage expecting defiance, expecting whispers, a confrontation, some kind of resistance she could dig her nails into. The drama of a scandal would have been preferable. A headline, a protest, even security demanding she leave. Instead, she found nothing. Her old parking space was no longer hers. Where her nameplate once sat, engraved and polished weekly, there was a new one. Mine. She sat behind the wheel for a full 30 seconds, engine running, eyes locked on those 8 cold letters, as if staring hard enough would make them glitch. Some mistake. A cruel prank. Then she jabbed her keycard into the entrance terminal. A red light blinked. Denied. She tried again and again. Same result. A security guard stepped forward, one she used to bark orders at. He didn't move aggressively, didn't even touch his radio. Just said, "Your credentials have been deactivated, ma'am." No hostility, no sarcasm, just procedure. She stared at him, expecting recognition, maybe pity, maybe fear. He looked at her the way people look at a malfunctioning vending machine. Upstairs, her assistant wasn't at her desk. Her inbox didn't ping. Her calendar didn't load. The building had moved on without her. Still, she tried the elevator, punched the code by memory. 5th floor, the executive suite. When the doors opened, she stepped out and stopped. The entrance, once a sleek glass double door with her name etched on the wall, was gone. In its place, frosted glass, no names, no access pad, and on the inside, through the blur, she saw movement, silhouettes, 12 chairs, one long table, and, at the head of it, my shape, sitting, calm, present. The board was in session. She raised her hand, instinctively reaching for the handle. No handle, no keycard access, just glass, a silent wall between what was and what now wasn't her. Inside, someone turned, one of the board members, a man who'd once called her the face of the future. He saw her, paused, then turned back to the meeting. Didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her at all. She knocked once. No answer. Twice, still nothing. Inside, I kept speaking. I didn't look up, didn't break my sentence. Margaret sat to my left, nodding occasionally as we outlined transition planning and media strategy. Evan was across from me, taking notes furiously. The room didn't go still because of her. It didn't even notice. Outside, she stepped back from the glass. And for the first time in her life, no one was watching her anymore. No cameras, no assistants, no audience. Only her reflection. Small, blurred, and slowly fading. The ballroom was understated, just as her father would have liked it. No spotlight, no press wall, no black tie spectacle. Just warm lighting, linen tablecloths, and a string quartet playing something nostalgic but forgettable. The placards bore names most of the company's current employees wouldn't recognize. Founders, architects, silent partners. People who built the bones of the empire before it had a marketing department. Most had gray hair, some had none. A few walked in with canes. One had been wheeled in by a grandson, but they were here. Because they remembered. Because I invited them. We didn't call it a celebration, we called it a legacy dinner. Something to close the circle, to honor what was built before the branding started to outshine the product. There was no red carpet, no photographers, just the right people, and one empty seat. She wasn't on the guest list, she knew that. But she came anyway. I saw her briefly from the podium, half shadowed at the edge of the service hallway, not in black, not in white, something neutral, invisible. She lingered like a question no one wanted to ask. The speech was short. It wasn't about me, it was about the company, about continuity, about the people in the room who signed papers in back offices and met in diners when there wasn't yet a budget for boardrooms. I thanked them, I told the truth, and at the end I said some inherit titles, others inherit responsibility. The room went still. Then came the applause, measured, warm, authentic, the kind you get once, if you're lucky. I stepped down from the podium and walked the perimeter of the room, shaking hands. The air smelled like dry wine and polished wood. No one rushed, no one shouted. It was the opposite of the empire she tried to run. This wasn't performance, this was foundation. And when I passed the service hallway, she was still there, waiting, back straight, jaw tense, eyes blank. We locked eyes. For a moment, I thought she'd speak, apologize, argue, plead, but she didn't. She just waited, maybe hoping I'd flinch, acknowledge her presence, throw her a scrap of the recognition she'd once drowned in. I stopped walking, just a step, close enough for her to hear, far enough that no one else would. And I said, "You should have read the shareholder report." Her mouth didn't move, her arms stayed crossed, but something behind her eyes dropped, not a tear, not guilt, something else. Wait. Then I walked on, back into the room filled with founders and finishers. She didn't follow. She didn't belong there anymore. She had tried to seize the crown, but the crown had always been ornamental. I never wanted it. I just built the kingdom.